Hey everyone, welcome to another G News podcast. Today we are joined by former Minister of Health, Senior Doctor and Labour's spokesperson for health, Dr Ayesha Verrall. Hey Ayesha, welcome to G News.
Yeah, thanks Jared. Thanks so much for having me.
You're very, very welcome. Let's start by looking back at this government and its track record on health. Kind of things that come to mind are things like the smoke-free law repeal, the sacking of the health board, the appointment of Lester Levy, spin about deficits, spin about 14 layers of management, spin about a botched merger, boasting about a record spend, denial that there was ever a hiring freeze, unsafe staffing levels, 5 targets, privatisations, and you could go on. But could you give us your high-level, summarised account of what you've seen happen in the past couple of years, and take as long as you like?
Yeah, thanks Jared, and you're totally right that it has been a chaotic couple of years for the health system, and talking to former colleagues that sense that hope, their hope to come out of the pandemic with a better path ahead has really been dashed. The health system is going backwards, and one of the, we can go into all of those sort of issues that have come up and controversies around the government if you want, but at a very high level, there have been substantial cuts to health funding. And that meant a lot of chaos within the health system as people have been restructured out of their jobs, sometimes once, sometimes twice in some parts of the health system, just in this government. And then the funding not keeping up with inflation, and you're hearing about that with some service cuts, but also in a large way the fact that the wages for our health workers aren't keeping up with where they need to be. So overall, an incredibly chaotic time as a government who didn't really have a proper plan for the health system came in and brought in Lester Levy and his cuts.
Yeah. Smoke-free legislation, that was repealed, and New Zealanders really never did get a very clear explanation about why that was done. You've asked the Auditor-General to investigate, that got turned down, but you've introduced the Members' Bill some time ago to deal with matters like conflicts of interests and supporting the tobacco industry. Could you tell us a little bit about that Members' Bill and actually what happened there?
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that everyone, I think, on any side of politics accepts is that smoking's bad for you. We've known that since the 1950s, and it's been a real project across both sides of government, actually, Labour and National, in the past to achieve the smoke-free 2025 goal. We put in place some legislation that was going to get us there, having a smoke-free generation, reducing the number of retail outlets when we were in government, and that's what this government came in and repealed. And not only is that really bad smoking policy, but it is also it's also just characteristic of this government that they're always focused on the short term. They never think about the fact that smoking is putting $1 billion of costs on our health system, and if we could address that, then we'd have more resources to give people the care that they need. So I think that is a real backward step. Look, I think it's pretty clear that the lobbyists got to the government through the New Zealand First Party. And there's no good reason why you would have repealed that bill and why you would give Philip Morris a $300 million tax break. That is absolutely unbelievable. So when it comes to those sorts of things, I think stopping lobbying is one of the strongest things we can do. The New Zealand Cancer Society, a non-governmental organisation that's in the community up and down the country, they did a report on how lobbyists have influenced the government recently. And that fed into a global report called the Tobacco Transparency Index. New Zealand fell from number 2 to number 56. Like, that is how much tobacco lobbyists are impacting our policies. So that's why I've got a bill in that would stop lobbyists from being able to influence government policy, stop the revolving door between people in government going to work for the tobacco industry, so that the industry knows how to influence government better. We got to stop that, because it's that enables the long-term interests of our people, democracy, and the health system to be undermined.
Exactly. There's been a big disconnect also between government rhetoric about a record spend on health and the contradictory experiences of people working in the health system at the coalface inside hospitals. Could you tell us about how a record spend is still an inadequate spend, and what is really happening here?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's every year we spend more on healthcare than we did the year before. That's been true since the health system started back in 1938. And the reason is because we have inflation and we have a growing and ageing population. So we have to spend more every year. And this, what the government has done, though, is because inflation's been very high, and they haven't really factored the number of extra people that were coming into the health system. Even though the funding's gone up as a number, in real terms it's gone down. And some estimates have put that as the lowest spending, the spending has gone down in real terms for the first time in 25 years, according to the economist Peter Huskinson. So, you know, that's why staff aren't getting recruited at the rate that they need to be, why graduate nurses had their jobs cut in the last few hiring rounds, and why they're going through looking for cuts everywhere, even trying to cut toast to new mums at Wellington Hospital until there was an outcry.
Oh, wasn't it bad? You've actually said at one point, Simeon Brown needs to grow up because he was provoking doctors with threats of a law change during bargaining. And he was suggesting that the law could be changed, you know, to prevent doctors having the right to go on strike. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that we're seeing from this government, and it's really quite bad faith. What's your view on the way that this government has treated our workforces?
The government has attacked and undermined the workforces, and, you know, these are my former colleagues, and I know that they don't take going on strike lightly. And I think the idea that you know, as a former Minister of Health, I look at Simeon Brown's decision to try and inflame this issue, which is what he's trying to do. He's being provocative. He's picking a fight with the union, and he's I guess calculating that if he does that, he'll be able to undermine the doctors' confidence in the union, and then they'll give up on their strike. But that is exactly the opposite of what's happening, and shows that he is immature and made a terrible misjudgment. Because actually what his behaviour does is just make doctors more determined to pursue their legitimate claims. And so he's just made his own job harder, because he wanted to get a good soundbite out of him looking tough and sticking it to the unions. And, you know, ultimately, it's just going to cost him more to settle the dispute when he behaves like that.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk now about Labour's 3 free visits to see GP every year. Can you tell everybody why access to primary care is so important for everybody, why this policy should still be universal, and the old answer to the same old question about why we will actually have enough workforce to make this implementation go okay?
Yeah, thanks. Look, our health system has a lot of problems, and fixing it is going to be a massive job. I reckon it'll take us 10 years, and there's no one who understands how tough it is more than me. But this is the thing. primary care access is absolutely the thing we have to achieve before we can act on any of the other issues. So if you think, because it's in primary care and specifically general practice, where we make so much of a difference to people's healthcare, it's often said that spending $1 in general practice saves you 10 in the hospital. And that's because simple things like getting your blood pressure checked, or getting your blood pressure checked and treated in primary care means that people don't go on to have a stroke or something that requires more expensive treatment down the line. And yet so many New Zealanders are missing out on primary care at the minute. 1 in 6 New Zealanders can't afford to go to their GP. There are tens of thousands of New Zealanders who won't go to the GP because they owe the clinic a debt. We have to end that. If New Zealanders, we are a third world country, if New Zealanders cannot get medical care in the community. So that's why we've chosen that as our priority policy of, noting that there'll still be other things that we have to do. The average New Zealander takes about 2.5 trips to the doctor a year, and we've said 3. So we do want to increase the number of visits a little, but also, this will make the majority, so 4 out of 5 people will not pay for general practice with this.
Right, well, when it comes to
the workforce, yeah.
Yeah.
I think, firstly, let's just put some context. So 2.5 visits a year, by funding 3, it's not like we're going to, this is not a big shift in the number of people going to general practice, but there will be some, we acknowledge that. And that's why we came up with a plan to free up 4.5 million visits. The way you can do that is by giving patients better information, so in some cases they won't need to come, by giving doctors more AI tools and technology to make their practice more efficient, and also by introducing triage in general practice, which we've had in the hospitals for hundreds of years, but in general practice it's less commonly used. Tying all those things together, what we're saying is we want to back general practice to be able to use their time for the people who need it most. Currently, it's just a first come, first serve approach to getting a visit. And so it's not all the people who need the visit most are getting it. And that's what that triage thing helps you do. So I don't see the workforce as actually the biggest block that we've got to get past to put this policy in place. We'll actually do a massive improvement in people's care even without workforce.
Okay, that's great. Okay, well, let's talk about the... some people may not be aware that there was a Labor policy there about independent GP pricing commission coming in, like putting that in place. In case viewers may have missed that, could you please talk about the benefits of doing that, putting that commission in place?
Yeah, look, we're at the point where we might lose general practice access in New Zealand unless something serious is done. You'll see that general practice is increasingly being bought out by corporates, and practices are finding it hard to be able to pay their doctors adequately and remain open. And when we were in government, we got a report saying that over a decade or more, general practices have been underpaid by about 7%. And that's because the government always drives a really hard bargain when it comes to negotiating the amount we'll pay general practice. But we shouldn't do that to the extent that we actually underfund them and therefore, undermine this service that we desperately need. So that's what the policy is about. We'll set up an independent agency and they will look at evidence, look at the costs that practices are facing and fund them on that basis. And we've been very clear that includes funding them for the model of care that they deliver. So if they're if they're a rural clinic or a clinic serving a high needs population because it's Māori, Pacific, migrant, refugee, that will be recognised and taken into account in the funding.
Okay. Labor's also come up with a low interest loan policy in order to attract more doctors into community medicine and helping them to set up their own medical practices. Could you talk to us about why that owner-operator model is important and how you see this really helping some communities in New Zealand access primary health care where maybe it was a bit difficult?
Yeah. The owner-operated general practice is just that the general practice practitioner in your neighbourhood, or the nurse practitioner in some cases, owns their own practice, and that is a model that we've had for a long time. It's been really effective, and yet it's getting degraded, and increasingly we're getting corporates buying out practices, and the number of owner-operators are slipping to about 2/3 of practices now. And we don't want medical care to end up being another duopoly like the supermarkets or the power companies, or, basically where we're stuck with these corporates that are just trying to extract profit. So backing an interest-free loan helps probably mostly young doctors when they're starting out in a new community to be able to buy a practice with no interest for the first 2 years, and then 3% interest rate for the remaining term of the loan, which is 10 years. I've met doctors who, I met Dr Monica Nua in Christchurch when I was speaking there recently, and she told me she had mortgaged her own house in order to be able to set up a practice in a new part of town that didn't have a GP. So that's not good enough. We want to back those doctors to be able to get into communities where there are challenges with access, often rural communities, but also some parts of our cities don't have enough practices. And we think that's, a little goes an awful long way in helping people get healthcare with that policy.
Yeah, definitely. We've just witnessed Scrutiny Week, and there was an exchange there between yourself and Casey Costello about whether she would accept her expert advisory group's recommendation to only introduce oral nicotine products if there was evidence that they were safer than tobacco and reduce smoking. So, what's your take on what actually happened there?
Oh my gosh, this is so bad. So for those who don't know, an oral nicotine product is a little pouch that's got nicotine that you put in your mouth, and I mean, it serves absolutely no purpose. There is nothing good about this, and yet Casey Costello seems to be interested in finding out whether it helps prevent smoking. And this is the tobacco industry's tactic, isn't it? It's trying to say, we've got these new products that are not as bad as tobacco, but fundamentally their whole business model is on keeping people hooked. And we're really concerned that these oral nicotine products will basically just be another thing that young people will get hooked at. So my back and forth with Casey Costello was all about trying to ask her, when it's been so hard getting vaping under control, why on earth are we considering letting another, genie out of the bottle with these oral nicotine products? So I don't see the point at all. We would definitely not allow them, and we'll vote against any measure to introduce them.
Yeah, that's a crazy exchange. The New Zealand Public have actually just been reading about the Public Health Agency this morning and yesterday facing job cuts to emergency management, pandemic preparedness and Maori health. And they're all on the chopping block at the Ministry of Health with yet another restructuring underway before Christmas. And so this has quite a number of the public health experts we heard from during the pandemic very worried. What's your view on the kind of cuts that are coming? It's still coming. We've got all these cuts coming.
Yeah, it's back to the point that this government has a really chaotic approach, and more than 2 years in is still restructuring the health system. They won't own up to that, but that is what they are doing. And it's there's been widespread cuts and changes to legislation around Māori health, clearly, and public health in this instance. And it just goes to show, the government's phase 2 of its Royal Commission is totally politically motivated. There is no effort to actually improve how we respond to future pandemics. They are cutting public health services. We already have a phase 1 report where they told me at Select Committee they were implementing some of those, and yet they're not. Our public health, it's clear we need to strengthen our public health resources, not cut them.
Yeah, totally. Finally, you said fixing the health system will be at the heart of the next Labor government's work. Can you explain to everybody what the top 3 or 4 things are that are really, really wrong with the health system right now that Labor is going to fix going into the next election?
Yeah, thank you. And that's a really good way to put it, Jared, because one of the things Chris Hipkins as a leader is really good at is getting us to focus, and so that's the challenge, because there's always 1,000 things you could focus on the health system. So number 1, we've said it's got to be primary care, that we've got to have action on that, because that is the thing that secures our health and keeps us well for the long term. Secondly, we do have to look after the good people who work in our health system. 70% of Health New Zealand's spending is on wages, and it's clear that people are struggling with gaps in staffing at the moment. And also, we need to keep up our momentum with training more workers here in New Zealand to be able to fill gaps in our workforce. I'd also say there's some of the benefits of the health reforms that this government has kept have not yet been fully realised. So it seems like there's a lot that needs to change in our health system, getting care out to the community, making things more convenient for patients. When I ask Health New Zealand about this at Select Committee and say these are great things, why aren't you doing more of them, they just say they haven't got the capability and capacity to do that. So I think that's the other point, is that so long as you're underfunding the health system, these changes that we all agree need to happen just take too long. So those will be some of the areas that we're focused on.
Dr Ayesha Verrall, thank you very much for joining us today. And I just, on behalf of everybody at G News who's listening, want to thank you personally for all the great work you did during the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly in contact tracing and as Minister of Health facing down a pretty difficult situation that haven't got the credit really that everyone deserves, and people have short memories. So here's to you. Cheers for all the work you did.
Thanks very much.
Love to have you back, and have a great Christmas, and we'll all be tuned into Parliament this week to see how things go.
Thank you. Ka kite ana.
Welcome to G News, the good news.
Yeah, right.